Have you ever had a moment so strange that it stopped you in your tracks? A moment when something deep inside whispered that what you were seeing was not just coincidence, but a message meant only for you. Because sometimes the most unsettling realization in life is not that the world is mysterious, but that the mystery might be trying to reach you personally. Imagine for a second that somewhere beyond the noise of daily life, beyond deadlines, traffic notifications, and the endless chatter of the mind, there exists another layer of you quietly observing every choice you make, watching every path you take, waiting patiently for the moment you finally notice the signals it has been sending all along. What if the dreams that felt unusually vivid, the strange coincidences that repeated themselves, the sudden intuitive feelings you could not logically explain were not random at all, but subtle attempts from a deeper intelligence within you trying to guide you somewhere important? Because here is the unsettling thought most people avoid. The version of you that understands your purpose might already know the direction your life is meant to take. But the everyday version of you, the one caught up in routines, worries, and endless thinking, rarely slows down long enough to hear it. And that raises a question that once you truly consider it becomes impossible to ignore. What if your higher self has been trying to get your attention for years, and the signs have been appearing right in front of you the entire time? The strange thing is that when these signals begin appearing, people usually dismiss them as imagination, coincidence, or stress. But those who pause long enough to look closer often realize that something deeper is unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary life, something that quietly reshapes the way they see themselves, their decisions, and even the reality around them. And I want to be honest with you for a moment. The first time I began noticing these signs, I tried to ignore them too, because accepting them meant admitting that reality might be far more responsive to our inner state than we were ever taught to believe. And that idea alone can shake the foundations of everything we think we know about control, destiny, and the invisible forces shaping our lives. Welcome to the Inner Code, where we explore the hidden patterns between consciousness and reality and the subtle signals that many people experience but few truly understand. Because if you are watching this video, there is a strong chance that some part of your mind has already begun asking deeper questions about the strange patterns appearing in your life. Questions that most people never dare to ask. And today we are going to explore something that may change the way you interpret those moments forever. The signs that your higher self may already be trying to communicate with you through experiences you once thought were meaningless. But before we go deeper into this journey, take a moment to support the channel by subscribing to the Inner Code, because every new subscriber helps this space grow and allows us to keep creating videos that explore the hidden side of human consciousness and the unseen forces shaping our lives. And if you stay with me until the end of this video, you may begin to recognize that some of the experiences you once dismissed might actually be signals pointing you toward a deeper understanding of who you truly are and the quiet intelligence within you that has been patiently waiting for you to notice it. And once you begin to see these signs, you may never look at your life the same way again. But here is the strange part that most people completely miss. The signals from your higher self rarely appear as dramatic supernatural events. Instead, they emerge through ordinary moments that suddenly feel extraordinary. Subtle shifts in perception, small coincidences that repeat themselves, dreams that feel too real to ignore, or a quiet inner knowing that appears without explanation. Moments that seem small on the surface, but carry a strange emotional weight, as if something inside you recognizes their meaning before your logical mind can catch up. And what makes this even more intriguing is that when people start noticing these signals, they often describe a feeling that is difficult to put into words, a sense that life itself is responding to something within them, almost as if reality were reflecting an internal state they had not fully understood before, which leads to one of the most fascinating possibilities of all, that the connection between your inner world and the experiences unfolding around you might be far more direct than most people realize. And as we move deeper into this conversation, you may begin recognizing that some of the signs we are about to explore are not distant theories, but reflections of moments that may have already appeared quietly in your own life. And if that realization happens for you today, it might mean that the conversation you are about to hear is not just information. It is a message arriving exactly when you are finally ready to notice it. And once you begin to accept the possibility that those strange moments in your life were not random after all, the next question naturally begins to surface in your mind. How could something deeper within you actually communicate with the everyday version of you that is constantly distracted by the noise of modern life? The answer is both subtle and fascinating, because the higher self does not communicate the way people expect. It does not appear dramatically in front of you like a character in a movie, and it does not shout instructions through some mystical voice in the sky. Instead, its language is quiet, indirect, and woven into the fabric of your daily experiences in ways that are easy to overlook if you are not paying attention. Imagine for a moment that your life is like a vast landscape filled with countless signals moving through it every second. Most people walk through that landscape with their attention fixed on practical concerns, their responsibilities, their worries about the future, or regrets about the past. Because of that, they rarely notice the subtle patterns forming around them. But the higher self communicates through those patterns. It communicates through moments that feel slightly out of place, through coincidences that repeat themselves just enough to make you pause, and through inner feelings that arise without any obvious external cause. I remember a moment from my own life when I first started noticing this. It was nothing dramatic at first. It began with small things that felt almost insignificant. I would think about someone I had not spoken to in years, and that same person would suddenly appear in my life again. I would wake from a dream that felt strangely vivid, only to realize later that the dream mirrored a situation that unfolded the following day. At first, I dismissed these experiences the way most people do. I told myself they were coincidences, tricks of the mind, nothing more than the brain trying to find patterns where none existed. But the more they happened, the harder it became to ignore them. And what made it even more interesting was the emotional tone that accompanied those moments. They carried a strange sense of familiarity, almost like remembering something you had forgotten rather than discovering something new. It felt as if a deeper part of me already understood what was happening before my logical mind had time to analyze it. That is the nature of communication from the higher self. It rarely forces itself into your awareness. Instead, it nudges your perception just enough to make you curious. It plants small questions in your mind and waits patiently to see whether you will follow them. Because curiosity is the doorway through which deeper awareness enters your life. And once that doorway opens, even slightly, you begin to notice that the signals have been there much longer than you realized. Many people describe this stage as the moment when life begins to feel different. Not necessarily easier or more dramatic, but more meaningful. The same events that once seemed ordinary start to carry a sense of quiet significance. A conversation feels strangely timed. A book appears in your life exactly when you needed the idea inside it. A decision that once felt confusing suddenly becomes clear through a simple inner feeling that says this is the direction you should take. These are not commands. They are invitations. Invitations to look deeper into the connection between your inner world and the reality unfolding around you. Because when the higher self reaches out, it is not trying to control your life. It is trying to remind you that the person you believe yourself to be right now is only a small fraction of the awareness that exists within you. And once you begin to realize that those subtle invitations are not random, but part of a deeper conversation between your inner awareness and the reality around you, another realization slowly begins to emerge, one that changes the way you interpret some of the most ordinary experiences in your life. Because one of the most common ways the higher self attempts to reach you is through something that happens every single night, while the conscious mind finally lets go of control, your dreams. Most people treat dreams like meaningless fragments created by a tired brain, strange images that dissolve the moment morning light enters the room. Yet there are certain dreams that feel very different. They do not fade quickly. They stay with you throughout the day, lingering in your thoughts with a strange emotional weight that is difficult to explain. Sometimes the details are vivid enough that you can recall them hours later, as if they were real experiences rather than imagination. I remember waking up one morning from a dream that felt more like a message than a story. In the dream, I was standing in a place that felt familiar but impossible to recognize at the same time, like a location I had known long ago but forgotten. Nothing dramatic happened. No voice appeared. No instructions were given, but there was a feeling that someone was trying to show me something important. At the time, I dismissed it the way most people dismiss dreams. But later that same week, I found myself in a situation that mirrored the exact emotional tone of that dream, almost as if the dream had prepared my mind for the moment before it arrived. Experiences like that are far more common than people realize. When the higher self communicates through dreams, it does not always deliver clear messages or predictions. Instead, it often uses symbols, emotions, and scenarios that bypass the logical mind entirely. During sleep, the analytical part of your brain becomes quieter, and the deeper layers of consciousness gain more freedom to express themselves. That is why dreams sometimes feel strangely personal, almost like conversations happening beneath the surface of awareness. You may notice recurring themes appearing in your dreams. Certain places appear again and again even though you have never visited them in waking life. Certain people appear at moments when you are facing important choices. Sometimes you dream about a situation that has not yet happened, only to recognize pieces of that dream later when real life unfolds in an eerily similar way. When that happens, many people feel a brief moment of confusion followed by an unexplainable sense of familiarity, the quiet thought that says, "I have felt this moment before." That feeling alone can make you pause. And that pause is important because it shifts your attention inward for just a second. It creates space between your automatic reactions and the deeper awareness observing them. That is often where the higher self begins to reach you. More clearly, not through dramatic visions, but through the subtle recognition that your inner world is quietly interacting with the events unfolding around you. Dreams become one of the first bridges between those two dimensions. They reveal that your consciousness is not limited to the waking identity you carry through your daily routine. Instead, there is a deeper intelligence moving through your mind, even when you are asleep, an intelligence that understands your fears, your desires, and the path you are slowly walking through life. And when you begin to treat certain dreams not as random stories, but as reflections of that deeper awareness, you may start to notice that the boundary between your inner world and your waking reality is far more fluid than you once believed. And once you begin to see how dreams quietly open a bridge between your deeper awareness and the world you experience every day, another form of communication begins to reveal itself. One that happens not while you are asleep, but right in the middle of ordinary conversations with other people. There is a strange phenomenon that many people experience, but rarely talk about, because it feels too subtle to explain. It happens in those moments when you are speaking with someone and suddenly realize that your thoughts seem to move in perfect alignment with theirs. You begin a sentence and they finish it before you do. You are about to express an idea and the other person speaks the exact words that were forming in your mind. At first it feels like coincidence, the kind of thing people laugh about and quickly forget. But if you pay close attention, you may notice that these moments sometimes carry an unusual sense of clarity, almost like a brief window where two perspectives merge into a single understanding. I remember sitting in a quiet cafe one afternoon talking with a friend about a decision that had been weighing on my mind for months. I had not yet told anyone about the deeper conflict I was feeling, and yet in the middle of our conversation my friend suddenly described the exact internal struggle I had been carrying without me ever explaining it. The words were so precise that I felt a chill run through my arms. For a moment, I wondered if I had accidentally said something out loud without realizing it. But I had not. It was as if the thought itself had traveled across an invisible space between us. Experiences like this often leave people with a strange feeling they cannot quite explain. It is not the kind of shock that comes from something dramatic. Instead, it is a quiet realization that the boundaries we believe separate our minds might not be as solid as we assume. When these moments happen repeatedly, they begin to suggest something deeper about the nature of consciousness itself. The higher self does not exist in isolation from the world around you. It is connected to a wider field of awareness that flows through every human interaction. When you become more attentive to that connection, certain conversations begin to feel different. You may notice that someone enters your life at the exact moment you needed to hear a particular idea. You may hear a sentence from a stranger that answers a question you had been silently asking yourself all day. These moments are easy to dismiss if you rush through life without reflection. But if you pause and allow yourself to observe them without immediately searching for a rational explanation, you begin to see that they form a pattern. The pattern reveals that communication from your higher self does not always come directly from within your own thoughts. Sometimes it appears through other people who unknowingly reflect the insight you needed to hear. In those moments, the person speaking may not realize they are carrying a message that resonates deeply with you. To them it is just another conversation. But to you it feels different, because something inside recognizes the timing and meaning behind the words. That recognition creates a powerful sense of connection, not only with the person in front of you, but with the larger flow of life itself. And when you start noticing how often these mirrored moments appear in your life, it becomes harder to believe that everything around you is simply random. Instead, it begins to feel as if reality itself is participating in a subtle dialogue with your awareness, using the voices of others to reflect truths that were already forming quietly within you. And as you begin to recognize that reality sometimes reflects your inner world through the voices and actions of other people, another signal quietly begins to appear in your life, one that does not come from conversations or dreams, but from a deeper place inside you that speaks without words. This signal is what many people simply call intuition. At first, it often appears as a faint feeling, something subtle that rises within you before your mind has time to analyze the situation. It may feel like a quiet pull in one direction or an unexpected hesitation that makes you pause even when everything around you seems perfectly normal. Most of us have experienced this at some point in life. You are about to make a decision that logically appears correct, yet something inside you whispers that something is not quite right. Or perhaps you suddenly feel drawn toward an opportunity that makes no sense on paper, yet deep down you feel an unusual certainty about it. I remember a morning years ago when I was rushing to an appointment across town. Like most people in a hurry, my mind was focused entirely on getting there as quickly as possible. There were two routes I could take. One was the usual highway that everyone used, and the other was a quieter road that added several extra minutes to the drive. Logically, the faster route made sense, yet for reasons I could not explain, I felt a strong impulse to avoid the highway that day. The feeling was not dramatic. It was not fear or panic. It was simply a calm but persistent sense that I should take the longer road instead. For a moment I ignored it and began driving toward the highway entrance. But the feeling did not go away. It lingered in the background of my thoughts until I finally turned the car around and followed the slower route. Later that day, I learned that a serious accident had blocked the highway during the exact time I would have been driving through that area. That moment stayed with me for years, not because it felt supernatural, but because it revealed something important about the quiet intelligence operating beneath our everyday awareness. Intuition rarely shouts. It does not argue with your logic or force you to obey it. Instead, it offers a gentle signal and then allows you to decide whether to listen. And that is what makes it such a powerful form of communication from the higher self. Because unlike external advice, intuition arises directly from within your own awareness. It is shaped by a deeper understanding of your life circumstances, your emotional state, and the direction your path is unfolding. When people begin to reconnect with this inner guidance, they often notice that life starts to feel less chaotic. Decisions that once seemed overwhelming become clearer. You start sensing when something aligns with your deeper values and when it does not, even before you can explain why. That does not mean intuition will remove every challenge from your life, but it does mean that you begin to move through those challenges with a different kind of awareness. Instead of reacting blindly to every situation, you develop a quiet partnership with the deeper part of yourself that sees the bigger picture. And over time, that partnership changes the way you experience the world, because you realize that guidance has always been available to you, not through loud signs or dramatic events, but through the silent voice that has been waiting patiently inside you all along. And as you begin to trust that quiet inner guidance more often, something even more curious begins to happen in your life, because the signals from your higher self do not only appear as feelings or dreams or conversations. Sometimes they begin to appear as patterns within reality itself. These patterns often arrive in the form of what people call coincidences, moments when two or more events line up with such precise timing that it feels almost impossible to dismiss them as random. At first, these experiences may seem small and easy to overlook. You might think about a certain idea all morning and then unexpectedly hear someone mention the exact same concept later that day. You might repeatedly notice the same number appearing in places where you would not normally pay attention, on a clock, on a receipt, on a license plate, while driving through traffic. Or you may suddenly encounter the same symbol or phrase again and again in completely unrelated places, as if something in the environment is quietly echoing a message back to you. When this begins to happen repeatedly, many people experience a moment of hesitation because the mind immediately tries to reduce the experience to pure chance. Our logical thinking is trained to assume that coincidence explains everything. And sometimes that is true. But there are certain moments when coincidence begins to feel too precise, too meaningful, almost like the universe is tapping you on the shoulder and asking you to pay attention. I remember walking through a bookstore one afternoon during a period of my life when I felt deeply uncertain about the direction I was taking. I had been silently asking myself the same question for weeks, wondering whether I was moving towards something meaningful or simply drifting through familiar routines. As I walked through the aisles, I noticed a book that had been placed face out on a shelf. What caught my attention was not the title, but a single sentence printed on the back cover. The sentence addressed the exact question I had been wrestling with internally. The words felt so direct that for a moment I stood there wondering how something so simple could mirror my thoughts so precisely. Experiences like that are not always dramatic, yet they carry a quiet emotional resonance that makes you pause and reflect. When the higher self communicates through synchronicity, the message rarely arrives in the form of clear instructions. Instead, it appears as alignment between your internal state and the events unfolding around you. It is as if the external world briefly mirrors the questions or intentions forming inside your mind. These moments often occur when you are approaching an important transition in life, when your awareness is beginning to shift but your conscious mind has not fully accepted the change yet. The synchronicities act like gentle markers along a path, subtle reminders that your awareness is interacting with a larger field of experience. Some people notice that these patterns become more frequent when they slow down and become more present in their daily lives. When you move through life with constant distraction, the signals are easy to miss. But when you take a moment to observe your surroundings with curiosity rather than urgency, the patterns begin to reveal themselves more clearly. Over time, you may realize that these coincidences are not trying to predict your future or control your choices. Instead, they serve as moments of recognition, brief flashes where the boundary between your inner awareness and the external world feels less rigid than it once appeared. And when you begin to see life through that lens, even the smallest moment can carry a sense of quiet meaning, as if reality itself is responding to the questions that are forming deep within your own consciousness. And when these subtle patterns of coincidence begin, appearing often enough that you can no longer dismiss them as random noise, another quieter shift begins happening within you, a shift that many people overlook because it does not occur in the outside world, but deep inside your perception of it. There comes a moment when you start noticing that certain environments, conversations, or even entire groups of people begin to feel different to you in a way that is difficult to explain logically. Places that once felt familiar may suddenly feel strangely heavy or draining, while other environments that once seemed ordinary begin to feel calm, clear, almost welcoming in a way you had never noticed before. At first, this shift can be confusing because nothing on the surface appears to have changed. The same people are still there, the same conversations are happening, the same routines continue moving through your days. Yet internally something is different. It is as if your awareness has quietly adjusted its sensitivity to the emotional and energetic atmosphere around you. I remember realizing this during a gathering with friends one evening. The room was filled with laughter, music, and conversation, the kind of scene that usually feels comfortable and familiar. But that night something felt slightly off. Certain discussions suddenly felt superficial in a way I had never noticed before. The energy of the room seemed loud, scattered, almost overwhelming. For the first time, I found myself stepping outside for fresh air just to clear my mind. Standing there in the quiet of the night, I noticed how calm everything felt away from the noise. The contrast was striking, and it made me realize that something within my perception had shifted. Experiences like that often mark a deeper stage in the communication between your higher self and your everyday awareness. As your internal sensitivity increases, you begin detecting subtle emotional signals that previously passed unnoticed. You may sense tension in a conversation even when nobody is openly arguing. You may feel an unexpected sense of peace around certain people who seem to carry a calm presence with them. This change does not mean that others are doing anything wrong, or that you are somehow separating yourself from the world. It simply means that your awareness is becoming more attuned to the emotional atmosphere surrounding you. In many ways, it is similar to adjusting the focus on a camera lens. The landscape was always there, but now the details appear sharper. This heightened sensitivity can initially feel uncomfortable because it forces you to acknowledge things that were once easy to ignore. Conversations that revolve around constant negativity may suddenly feel exhausting. Situations driven by pressure or conflict may create a strong inner resistance that was not there before. Yet at the same time, you may discover moments of connection that feel deeply nourishing, conversations that leave you feeling lighter rather than drained, environments that support a sense of clarity rather than confusion. These shifts are not random emotional reactions. They are signals that your awareness is aligning more closely with the deeper intelligence within you. The higher self often communicates through this form of sensitivity because it allows you to recognize what resonates with your authentic state and what does not. Instead of forcing you to follow rigid rules about how life should be lived, it gently adjusts your perception so that certain paths naturally feel more aligned while others begin to lose their appeal. Over time, this awareness changes the way you move through the world. Decisions that once required endless analysis begin to resolve themselves through simple observation of how something feels within your body and mind. You start noticing which environments expand your sense of clarity and which ones contract it. And as this sensitivity grows, you realize that guidance from your higher self is not always about dramatic revelations or mystical visions. Often it appears as something far more practical. The quiet ability to sense where your energy belongs and where it does not. A subtle form of inner navigation that gradually leads you toward experiences that reflect who you are becoming rather than who you once were. And as this inner sensitivity grows stronger and your awareness becomes more attuned to the subtle signals within and around you, another realization begins to unfold, one that quietly transforms the way you interpret your own life story. At some point, you may begin to notice that the path you once believed was entirely controlled by external circumstances starts to feel different, almost as if your internal state is shaping the direction of your experiences more than you previously realized. There are moments when your thoughts, emotions, and intentions seem to influence the way events unfold around you. A shift in your mindset leads to new opportunities appearing where none seemed possible before. A change in your perspective alters the outcome of a situation that once felt fixed. At first, these changes might appear subtle, easy to dismiss as luck or timing, yet over time a pattern begins to emerge. The more aware you become of your inner state, the more clearly you see how it interacts with the world outside of you. I remember going through a period when everything in my life seemed to move in the same frustrating cycle. The same problems appeared again and again in different forms. The same types of misunderstandings repeated themselves in relationships, and the same sense of stagnation followed me from one project to the next. It felt as though life itself had become stuck on a loop. For a long time, I believed the cause was entirely external, something in the world that needed to change before my situation could improve. But eventually I began to notice something uncomfortable yet revealing. The patterns in my life seemed to mirror the patterns in my own thinking. The doubts I carried internally were reflected in the opportunities one hesitated to pursue. The fears I rarely acknowledged quietly shaped the decisions I made each day. When that realization first appeared, it felt both unsettling and strangely empowering at the same time. Because if the external patterns of life could mirror the internal patterns of thought and emotion, then perhaps changing the inner landscape could slowly transform the outer one as well. This idea does not suggest that we control every event that happens around us, because life will always contain unpredictability. But it does reveal that our perception and our responses play a far greater role in shaping our experience than we often realize. The higher self often communicates through this reflection between inner awareness and external reality. It shows you how your current state of mind is interacting with the opportunities and challenges unfolding around you. When you begin to observe this connection without judgment, you gain the ability to adjust your inner state consciously. Instead of reacting automatically to circumstances, you start asking a different kind of question. You begin wondering what part of your thinking might be contributing to the pattern you are experiencing. Sometimes the answer appears through a sudden moment of clarity, and other times it emerges slowly through reflection and observation. Yet with each moment of awareness, the connection between your inner world and your lived experience becomes more visible. Over time, this realization changes how you move through challenges. Instead of feeling trapped by external conditions, you begin exploring the possibility that transformation starts within your own perception. When you adjust the way you see a situation, new possibilities often appear where the old perspective saw only limitations. And through that gradual shift, you begin to understand something that once sounded abstract, but slowly becomes deeply personal. The relationship between consciousness and reality may be far more interactive than most people have ever been taught to believe. And as this understanding begins to settle quietly within your mind, another question naturally rises to the surface, a question that many people eventually face once they start noticing these subtle signals from within and around them. What are you supposed to do with this awareness once you recognize it? Because recognizing the signs is only the beginning. The deeper shift begins when you learn how to respond to them with intention rather than ignoring them out of habit. In the early stages of becoming aware of this inner guidance, most people feel a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. Part of you senses that something meaningful is unfolding, yet another part of your mind remains cautious, wondering whether you are simply imagining patterns that are not truly there. This inner tension is completely natural. The logical mind has spent years learning to rely only on what can be measured and explained, so when a deeper form of awareness begins to emerge, it can feel unfamiliar at first. I remember sitting quietly one evening after a long day, reflecting on several strange coincidences that had happened throughout that week. The same thought kept repeating itself in my mind. If these signals are real, then why do they appear so subtly? Why not something obvious and undeniable? The answer came slowly, not as a sudden revelation, but as a quiet realization that grew clearer over time. If the guidance from your higher self arrived in dramatic ways every time, it would remove your freedom to choose how you respond to life. Instead of learning to trust your own awareness, you would simply wait for instructions. But the purpose of these signals is not to control your path. It is to help you become more conscious of the connection between your inner world and the reality you experience. That is why the messages often appear as gentle invitations rather than commands. They ask you to pause, observe, and reflect before moving forward. One simple way to begin working with this awareness is by creating small moments of stillness in your daily life. Not long, complicated rituals, but brief pauses where you step back from constant distraction and listen to what is happening inside your own mind. When you slow down even for a few minutes, you begin to notice thoughts and feelings that normally pass unnoticed during a busy day. In that quiet space, you can ask yourself a simple question that many people never think to ask. What is my deeper awareness trying to show me right now? You do not need to force an answer. In fact, the most interesting insights often appear when you are not trying to control the process. They emerge as subtle impressions, new perspectives, or sudden clarity about something that once felt confusing. The key is learning to trust that inner response without immediately dismissing it. Over time, this practice strengthens your ability to recognize the signals that appear throughout your life. The dreams that linger in your memory begin to feel more meaningful. The intuitive feelings you once ignored become easier to understand. The coincidences that once seemed random begin to reveal a sense of quiet timing. Gradually, you realize that communication with your higher self is not something distant or mystical. It is simply the process of becoming aware of the deeper intelligence that has always been present within your own consciousness. And as that awareness grows, life begins to feel less like a series of disconnected events and more like an unfolding conversation between the person you believe yourself to be and the deeper self that has been guiding you all along. And as you continue practicing this quiet awareness and learning to listen to the deeper signals within your own consciousness, there comes a moment when something even more profound begins to shift in the way you understand yourself. The signs you once interpreted as messages coming from somewhere outside of you begin to feel different, almost as if they were never separate from you in the first place. At first, this realization can feel subtle, almost like a distant thought appearing at the edge of your awareness. But over time, it grows stronger and more personal. You begin to recognize that the higher self is not some distant guide observing your life from far away. It is a deeper dimension of your own consciousness that has always been present beneath the surface of your everyday identity. For most of our lives, we move through the world identifying ourselves primarily with our roles, our responsibilities, our memories, and the constant stream of thoughts running through our minds. These elements become the story we tell ourselves about who we are. Yet when you begin noticing the signals we have explored throughout this journey, dreams that feel meaningful, intuition that quietly redirects your choices, coincidences that mirror your inner questions, and subtle shifts in emotional awareness, something unexpected starts to happen. You begin to realize that the part of you observing all these experiences is not limited to the thoughts themselves. There is a deeper presence within you that watches those thoughts come and go. I remember the first time I became aware of that distinction. I was sitting alone late at night after a long day, my mind replaying conversations and decisions from earlier that afternoon. Thoughts were moving quickly, jumping from one worry to another. But then a strange question appeared in my mind. If I can observe these thoughts, who exactly is the one doing the observing? That moment did not bring an immediate answer, but it opened a door that changed the way I understood my own awareness. The thoughts continued moving, yet there was another part of my consciousness quietly watching them without being caught inside them. In that space, something felt calm and clear, almost like standing on the shore watching waves move across the surface of the ocean. The waves were active and sometimes chaotic, but the awareness observing them remained still. That quiet observer is often the closest everyday experience we have of the higher self. It is not dramatic or mystical in the way people often imagine. It does not speak with a booming voice or present itself as a separate entity. Instead, it appears as a steady sense of presence beneath the movement of your thoughts and emotions. When you begin recognizing that presence, many of the signals you once interpreted as external guidance start to make more sense. The dreams that felt meaningful were reflections of deeper awareness communicating through symbolic language. The intuitive feelings that redirected your decisions were signals emerging from the same inner intelligence that observes your life from a broader perspective. The coincidences that seemed to mirror your thoughts were moments when your awareness and the unfolding of reality briefly aligned in ways that revealed that deeper connection. Over time, you realize that this intelligence has always been part of you, quietly guiding your attention toward experiences that help you grow and understand yourself more fully. The journey then becomes less about searching for answers somewhere outside, and more about learning to trust the depth of awareness that already exists within you. When you begin living from that place, even ordinary moments can carry a sense of quiet meaning. A conversation becomes an opportunity to listen more deeply. A challenge becomes a chance to observe how your awareness responds rather than reacting automatically. And life slowly transforms from a series of disconnected events into a living dialogue between the person you believe yourself to be and the deeper consciousness that has been present within you all along. And when you begin to recognize that this quiet observer within you has always been present beneath every thought and every experience, something even more profound begins to change in the way you move through your life. Because once that awareness becomes clearer, you slowly realize that the signals from your higher self were never meant to be mysterious puzzles that you had to solve. They were invitations guiding you toward a deeper relationship with your own consciousness. At first, this realization may feel almost too simple to accept. After all, most of us grow up believing that meaning must be found somewhere outside of ourselves, in achievements, recognition, or the approval of others. We are taught to search endlessly for the next goal, the next milestone, the next proof that we are moving in the right direction. Yet when the connection with your deeper awareness begins to strengthen, you start noticing something different about those pursuits. The things that once felt urgent may lose some of their power over your attention. The need to constantly chase validation begins to soften, and in its place a quieter form of clarity emerges, one that does not depend on external confirmation to know when something feels aligned with who you truly are becoming. I remember a period in my own life when I was convinced that success meant following a path that everyone else around me seemed to be pursuing. It looked impressive on the surface. It made sense according to every practical rule I had learned. Yet deep down there was a subtle discomfort that never fully disappeared. It was not loud enough to stop me immediately, but it was persistent. Every time I paused long enough to listen inward, that quiet inner presence seemed to ask the same question. Does this path actually reflect who you are, or does it simply reflect what you believe you are supposed to be? For a long time I ignored that question because it felt easier to continue moving forward than to reconsider everything I had already invested my energy into. But eventually the contrast between my external progress and my internal uneasiness became impossible to ignore. When I finally allowed myself to step back and observe the situation honestly, something surprising happened. The fear that had kept me attached to that path began to dissolve, and in its place there was a sense of calm that I had not felt in years. It was as if the moment I acknowledged that deeper awareness within me, life itself began to reorganize in subtle ways. Opportunities appeared that aligned more closely with my genuine interests. Conversations with people began opening doors that I had never previously considered. The direction of my life did not change overnight, but the way I moved through it changed completely. Instead of forcing every decision through endless mental analysis, I began listening more carefully to the quiet signals within my own awareness. What surprised me most was how practical that guidance often felt. It did not lead me into abstract ideas or dramatic spiritual experiences. It simply encouraged honesty, clarity, and presence in the choices I was making each day. Over time, I realized that the higher self does not ask you to become someone different from who you are. It invites you to remove the layers of distraction and expectation that have slowly covered your natural awareness. When those layers begin to fall away, even slightly, you discover that the guidance you once searched for outside of yourself has always been quietly available within you. And as this quiet understanding deepens, and you begin to trust that the guidance you once searched for has always existed within your own awareness, a natural question begins to emerge from that realization. How do you actually strengthen this connection in your everyday life? The truth is that the relationship with your higher self does not grow through dramatic rituals or complicated practices. It grows through simple moments of presence that most people overlook in the middle of their busy routines. Because the deeper intelligence within you speaks most clearly when the noise of constant distraction begins to fade. In the modern world, our attention is constantly pulled outward. Notifications, responsibilities, deadlines, and endless streams of information compete for every moment of focus. When the mind is trapped in that constant movement, it becomes difficult to hear the quieter signals rising from within. That is why one of the most powerful ways to reconnect with your higher awareness is surprisingly simple: learning to pause. Not a long withdrawal from life, but small moments where you step out of the rush of your thoughts and become aware of the present moment again. I often think about a simple practice that began helping me notice this connection more clearly. It did not involve hours of meditation or complicated techniques. It started with something much smaller. Whenever I noticed my mind becoming overwhelmed by noise or pressure, I would stop whatever I was doing for a brief moment. Sometimes it was in the middle of a busy afternoon. Sometimes it happened while walking outside or sitting quietly at night. In that moment, I would simply close my eyes, take one slow breath, and allow my attention to settle inward instead of outward. Then I would ask a quiet question inside my mind. What is my deeper awareness trying to show me right now? I did not force an answer. I simply listened. Sometimes nothing appeared immediately, and that was perfectly fine. But other times a subtle shift would occur. A new perspective would appear about a situation that had been confusing me earlier in the day. A feeling of clarity would replace the tension that had been building in my thoughts. And occasionally a simple insight would emerge that quietly redirected my next decision. What makes this process powerful is not the specific answer that appears in those moments, but the habit of creating space for your deeper awareness to surface. Over time, those small pauses begin to change the way you experience your entire day. Instead of reacting automatically to every situation, you develop the ability to step back and observe what is happening both around you and within you. The signals from your higher self become easier to recognize because your attention is no longer completely absorbed by the surface level of experience. You begin noticing the subtle guidance hidden inside your own feelings, your intuitive responses, and the quiet clarity that appears when your mind becomes still. And through this practice, something important becomes clear. Your higher self has never been silent. It has been communicating with you through countless small moments of awareness throughout your life. The only thing that has been missing is the space to hear it. And when you begin creating that space, even for a few minutes each day, you may discover that the connection you once thought was distant is actually closer than you ever imagined. And once you begin creating those small moments of silence where your deeper awareness has space to surface, a final realization slowly begins to unfold, one that quietly reshapes the way you understand your entire journey. You start to see that the signs we talked about throughout this conversation were never random interruptions in your life. They were markers along a path you were already walking, dreams that lingered in your mind, coincidences that seemed too precise to ignore, intuitive feelings that gently redirected your choices, and the quiet presence observing your thoughts all along were not separate experiences. They were different ways your deeper awareness was guiding you to remember something very simple, yet very powerful, that the direction of your life is not determined only by the external world, but by the relationship you build with your own consciousness. When I look back at the moments in my life that once felt confusing or uncertain, I now realize that many of them were actually invitations. At the time, they appeared as challenges, coincidences, or strange inner feelings I could not fully explain. But with distance and reflection, I began to see a pattern. Each moment was quietly asking the same question. Are you paying attention to what your inner awareness is trying to show you? The deeper lesson hidden inside all of this is not about becoming perfect, enlightened, or completely certain about every decision you make. The real lesson is much more human and much more practical. It is about learning to live with awareness instead of moving through life on autopilot. When you begin listening to the signals within your own consciousness, you develop a relationship with yourself that many people never take the time to build. And that relationship slowly changes everything. Decisions become less about fear and more about alignment. Challenges become opportunities to observe your own growth rather than obstacles you must fight against. Even ordinary moments begin to feel more meaningful because you are no longer disconnected from the awareness experiencing them. The most practical way to apply this understanding is surprisingly simple. Start by creating small spaces of awareness in your everyday life. When you wake up in the morning, take a moment before reaching for your phone and notice the state of your mind. During the day, pause for a few seconds when something feels confusing or emotionally intense, and ask yourself what your deeper awareness might be trying to reveal through that moment. And when you notice subtle signals such as intuition, repeating patterns, or meaningful dreams, treat them not as strange coincidences, but as invitations to reflect more deeply on your path. Over time, these small practices begin to reconnect you with a sense of inner guidance that has always existed beneath the surface of your daily thoughts. And when that connection becomes stronger, life begins to feel less like a chaotic series of events and more like a conversation between your everyday self and the deeper intelligence quietly guiding your awareness forward. So now I want to ask you something simple. Have you ever experienced a moment in your life when a dream, coincidence, or intuitive feeling seemed to guide you in an unexpected direction? If you have, share your experience in the comments below so everyone watching can learn from different perspectives. And if this video helped you see these moments in a new way, consider subscribing to the Inner Code to support the channel and help us continue exploring the deeper connection between consciousness and reality in future videos.